Hi friends, and welcome to my channel. My name is Joel David Bond, and I'm an educator here in West Africa at a private international school, teaching middle school English language arts and literature. Today I'm going to talk to you about stage 3 in my 4-stage system of getting students to read and engage with literature on a daily basis. So today's session is called Speak and Spark. If you haven't checked out the previous 2 videos, go back and check those out first because they do lead into this particular session. So my first video is called Snap and Scribble, and those are annotation grids getting students to engage with the text as they read. The second video in the series is called Think and Ink, where you do some written responses with the students. And today we're going to do Speak and Spark, which is a kind of Socratic seminar or Harkness kind of engagement with the students. So if you've never done a Harkness circle or a Socratic seminar, there's nothing to fear. It actually can work really, really well so long as you set down some expectations for your students in advance. When I first came into this, I was like, oh my goodness, this is going to be out of my control. These kids are going to either talk too much, or they're not going to respect each other, or they'll have nothing to talk about. And what I found through some trial and error was this particular system, which helped my students really engage with the text, understand what the other people were saying in the group, and listen with respect. So let's dive into it. I'll show you the materials that I have and that I use, and hopefully you will work with them too. There we are. Sorry for the sudden flip there. Let's show on the screen the slides that I use with my students here. This is a kind of template which is available on my Teachers Play Teachers store. You can find that at English Lifeboat at Teachers Pay Teachers. And this is stage 3. It's the Speak and Spark Harkness Circle discussion. So in this particular system, as I said, there's 4 parts to it. We're on part 3, which is where we're refining our ideas that we have already captured and processed. And so now in collaborative discussions, we're going to try and ignite some deeper thinking with the students through this Harkness Circle system. So what's included in these slides? So as I said, these are templates that you can plug and play with your particular literature that you're working with your students. There's included a space for chapter summaries, some big ideas and themes, some thought questions that you would like to guide the students towards, some question frames to help your students generate questions to bring to the circle, then some discussion guidelines that I offer to you as the teacher that you'll need to replace with some student-friendly versions, and then we've got some end matter at the end just to tidy things up today. So let's walk through this step by step. So the first thing that I like to do when we're preparing for a Harkness Circle is I like to give some short summaries based on the chapters that are due for that week. What do we want to focus on? Where are we in the book? And what is it that we need to really key into at this point in our study? So what I like to do here is I use some bullet points to jog students' memory about key moments that we have read in the book. And rather than having a lengthy paragraph text, I don't want to do a Cliff's Notes version here. I just want to do some key highlight moments. What I found is really fun as well is I'll often put those highlight moments into an AI engine like ChatGPT or Perplexity and see what it comes up with as an image to show the students on the slide as well. If there's a film of the book that you're reading, then you can always try and screen grab different images that are available for use to add in here as well. I always think the students find it really fun to see what AI generates for what we're reading at any point in time. So I like to do some bullet points and then see what AI comes up with for us and share that with the class just to prime their thinking for our conversation, which will happen shortly. Once we've done the quick review, I also do a short review, just 2 or 3 minutes. I fly through these really quickly at the beginning of the class, because these we've typically already covered in our Snap and Scribble and Think and Ink sessions. So at this point in the week, we're 3 or 4 hours into our weekly routine. They've already seen these big ideas and themes, so this is just a refresher to get them cued into the sorts of things we want to ask and talk about. So here I'll recycle our themes from the previous slideshows that we've had in this week and just give them a couple of key passages or key notes, things that they might have forgotten since we started this on Monday and now we're looking at Thursday or Friday in the class. So just a quick review on a few key ideas. Often then what I'll then do is I preview a couple of questions that I would like the students to consider including into their conversation. Typically what I do is one main question that you see in the center of the screen, and that's kind of very focused on the literature side of things, and two ancillary questions that maybe bring things more to a personal level. So if I'm asking about a major theme and what the characters are doing at a particular point in the book, then maybe the side questions will be, how does the theme apply to you? Or have you experienced a similar thing? Or what's your reaction to having seen this in the book? I have a few different options that I normally put off on those side questions. Again, this is all our preparation for our circle, so I try not to spend a lot of time at the front end. I want to give the students as much time as possible to talk, but I also need to prime their thinking for where we're going to go. So with these questions, I often have them reviewed very quickly, maybe a minute, 30 seconds for each one that I have on the screen. And then I tell the students that we'll come back to these same questions at the end of the conversation if they haven't already been asked. So we fly through these pretty quickly, and then we get into the meat of the lesson. Here we do our question frames. And you'll find on my Teachers Pay Teachers store, there's a form that you can print out, just a printable form that has discussion questions on one side and an exit ticket on the other side. I found this to be a really useful technique to get the students to bring their questions to the circle, but also to process what they've talked about at the end of the circle as well. So the next several slides, I have these linked to particular aspects of the previous two sessions. So their question frames might draw directly from their annotation grids, or they might draw directly from our chosen reading responses from the Think and Ink session. I mix and match these every week, depending on where we are at the book and what are the key themes that we want to look at. So all of the following slides are not all slides that you want to give to your students. What I'll do is typically choose 2, maybe 3 of these slides and give the students a couple of minutes for each one to generate their own questions based on these prompts. One thing that I like to do with this is I like to have this at the beginning of the year, set up this expectation of here are some questions that you can use. And then slowly as the year progresses, I actually withdraw these sorts of questions and allow the students to create and generate their own. Because later in the year, they'll have come to understand the sort of expectations for the questions that are to be brought into the circle. So what kind of questions do we want? Well, here I've got the first 9 slides here are all based on their annotation grids. So I might have them choose to generate questions based on their doodles. What did they draw this week based on their reading? Or big ideas. What are some big themes that we've drawn out of the text, and is there a way you want to connect that to the real world? Maybe a motivation. We've taken a look at the characters and what they're doing and why, and so we'd like to dig into that a little further with some questions. Quotations. Did you find something in the book that really just stood out to you, that you're like, man, that was a deep thought, and I wish I knew how to unpack that? Maybe you have a cause and effect week where you're willing to take a look at how one action provokes another. And so we're going to take a look at the links between earlier actions in the book and what's happening now, which might also lead into conflict questions. What's the big conflict that the story that's driving the story forward that needs to be unpacked in our conversation? Maybe we'll take a look at symbols and imagery. So is there something in the book at this point that's now something deeper? It means something more than what we thought it did, and we need to address that as a question in the circle. Or did you just have a big general question that you wanted to throw out there and say, this is something we should talk about that nobody else seems to be coming up with? These are all the sorts of questions that I have the students work with, and you'll see I have sort of level 1, level 2, and level 3 on the screen. Level 1 questions are kind of your most basic, level 2 are mid-level, and level 3 require a lot more critical thinking and depth of thought. And I always tell the students, use one of these questions or create your own. You are not bound to just these questions, but I'd love you to fall within the category. So if you've got a discussion question, if you have a motivation question, if you have a conflict question, great, bring it, write your own and bring it to the circle. These are just prompts to help you out. Personal reaction is another one, so maybe I want to talk about, well, how did you respond to what we've read this week? The next series here then are ones that relate more to our Think and Ink sessions. So the second session of the week we've done our written responses, and these might be based on things like character analysis or relationships or predicting the future in the book. So again, the same setup here. They're question prompts. You don't have to use these, but I'd love you to use the category or the topic to develop the questions to bring to the circle. So just to quickly run through all of these, discussion questions is to open in general. A plot summary, should we talk about just key events? Spot the setting, so what's happening in the location, the time period, etc. Theme recognition, again, what's our big idea? What do we think will happen next with predict the future? Can we explain the conflict and unpack that? Is there a character analysis? How would you describe the people we're seeing in the book? What's the motivation? Some of these have a repetition with their annotation grids, and so these work really well in tandem with each other. They'll play off one another often. Can you connect what we have with another text or idea? Or can we talk about things from the perspective of a different character? We want to change point of view and explore what this person might be thinking from inside another character's head. What's the relationship and how are things developing across the character arc? Is there more symbolism or imagery that needs to be unpacked? Is there language that's metaphorical or symbolic somehow that we want to take a look at? All of these are things that I want to throw into the circle, have questions that the students come up with, and I always leave space at the end for them to come up with any other question they want to bring to the circle. So by the end of 5 or 6 minutes, and I give them just a short amount of time, because at this point in the week, they've already done a lot of processing through their annotation grids, through their written responses, so they're primed already for a lot of these things. So just a couple of minutes is all I really give them to generate 3 or 4 questions. And then we go into some discussion guidelines. Now, this is the part where you have to allow yourself a little bit of chaos in your classroom and trust the process. At the beginning of the year, I set it up and I tell my students that we're going to sit in a circle and I'm outside the circle as a moderator. I'm not involved in the conversation, that the students are running and leading the conversation. Typically, as a good idea, I like to set a time limit for them to move their chairs into a circle, and I often, with the younger kids, will ask them to sit boy, girl formation around the circle. This just sort of helps disrupt the boys all clumping together and the girls all clumping together and ending up with a big social hour. So just by having that boy-girl mix around the circle and setting a time limit, I've found 3 minutes is often plenty of time for students to sort of pack away their items, push their tables to the side, and bring all their chairs, find their bearings, and get themselves settled into the circle. Once they're in the circle, I generate a list of a couple of things that are our rules for our Harkness circle. So here's the first stage, and I progressively move this across the year. So at the beginning of the year, it's very teacher-directed. I might start with a focus question, or I'll feed a question in, and students have to raise their hand to respond. Once I get that, handed that over to the class, then I'll often have them choose the next person to respond to. So I initiate the conversation, and then I step outside the circle and let them carry forward. You often have to allow for a moment or two of awkward silence as students aren't used to self-directing. But resist the urge to jump into the circle and get them to talk. Sit outside and allow them to think and reflect and figure out how to manage this conversation. And if you allow yourself that space and time, you will find that it does actually work, provided you give them these guidelines. So at the beginning of the year, I might do speaking tokens. Everyone gets 3 physical tokens, 3 coins, 3 pieces of paper or something. And every time they speak, they just drop a token into a container in the middle of the circle or just right in front of them on the floor, however you want to generate that. And once they're out of tokens, they're not allowed to speak until all other students have spoken. You might say things like they need to use their prepared questions or start with a prepared question and then they can ask a follow-up question. You might give some sentence frames on how to respond to other people. So listen and then respond using some sentence frames like I agree or I see it differently. You might want to throw in there at the beginning a quote requirement that at least one student per turn or per round, and you can define what that means, has to refer directly to the text with a quotation. And typically at this point, I will do some sort of scorekeeping. I found that nothing motivates students more than having some sort of points. Even if the points are made up and not worth anything, I'll always do some sort of point keeping. So in this case, I like to do just a list of the student register. And I'll just do tally points anytime a student contributes a thoughtful remark to the conversation or asks a follow-up question. I really like to encourage participation, listening, structure, and speaking with confidence, and I will tell students that they can lose their bonus points if they interrupt, if they're talking off topic, or fail to meet a participation quota. At the end of the discussion, students write a one-sentence takeaway on the back of their question page on their exit ticket and hand that in. And once they have all those discussion questions and exit tickets, I just compare that with my tally sheet, and I'll give them some bonus points based on that. Now, however your marking system works, in my system where I currently am, I count this conversation as a bonus point. It's extra credit. Your system and your grading requirements might be slightly different. You may not be able to do that. You may have to throw things in there or make a set a minimum requirement. You need to decide how that works within your grading structure and your district and your system, your school system. That's how we begin things in the beginning of the year. As the year progresses and students gain more confidence, I make it more student-led. I often will remove myself completely from that initial conversation starting. I'll assign different conversation managers, or I'll simply say that when you ask a question, you are the conversation manager for 2 to 5 respondents until you select the next conversation manager. That I found has been a really useful way to help balance things. So a student will ask a question and they need to call on at least 2 people to respond, or up to 5 before they can select a new question manager to ask the next question. I encourage people to comment on other people's ideas and go for self-regulated participation. Students track their own participation, they can if they like, and I'm always the observer on the outside. Same thing, students gain points contributing thoughtful responses and lose points by distracting or disrupting others. By the end of the year, I try to make it a more open flow discussion. So students respond organically. I often will have lost a lot of our question frames and allowed students to create their own by this point. They understand the expectations, they can dig deeper into their own thoughts, and I often will say you need to invite people in who haven't contributed to the conversation and challenge and defend ideas politely and firmly. I'll often choose 2 student scorekeepers, usually a boy and a girl, give them a copy of our register, and they keep the tally marks for themselves. I will also tally mark as well, and then I'll often just average those marks across to give those bonus points. Those are just different techniques that I found to manage a Harkness Circle conversation. It's been a super useful way to get students to express their thoughts and ideas, and even those who don't contribute regularly to the conversation will submit really useful, really thought-provoking exit tickets because they've listened to what the others have said. The other thing that I often plan with this is I'll plan the Harkness Circle discussion for the lesson immediately before our mastery session, which is session 4 in our next video, which is often a weekly quiz or some sort of in-group group participation project. So by having read the work, processed it through their writing, discussed it with their peers, they are now ready and fully capable of answering any questions I'm going to throw at them on a quiz. We've talked about things, and sometimes I will actually just use questions directly from the students' questions that they've created themselves as a bonus question at the end of a weekly quiz. So great ways to get the students engaged with the work, for them to talk about the things that they want to talk about, and for them to listen and engage and spar with one another. The other thing that I love about the Harkness Circle conversations and doing it this way is that it allows you to sort of step outside and listen closely to what the students are learning and thinking about. And if students have gone off base or off target with their written responses earlier in the week, they'll often autocorrect in conversation when they hear their peers talking about different ideas. And they'll think, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Now I see it in this light rather than that way. And so it really serves as a great course correction for a lot of students who might have missed the mark a little bit earlier on with their own thoughtful written responses, and they're now hearing other points of view. I love the Harkness Circle. The students look forward to it every week. It's one of my favorite parts of my literature classes, and I've found that by providing these sorts of guidelines, it really does provide a structure for the students to follow, that they look forward to, and they can dig deep and think deep about the work that they're reading in class. So if you're interested in any of these materials, you can go ahead and hop over to my Teachers Pay Teachers store at English Lifeboat. on Teachers Pay Teachers. You can find all that material there, including these pre-made slides, as well as a printable handout for the questions. And you can also see my other two previous units on Snap and Scribble, there we are, and Think and Ink. So our annotation grids and our reading responses, you can find both of those. And coming up next in video 4 will be our mastery session to lock it in. You'll see all that on the next video series. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you found this useful. If you have, drop a comment down below and let me know how you've employed this sort of system for your class, what works best for you. I'd love to learn from you and see how we can make things better for all of our students wherever we are in the world. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.